Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Doing More for the Economy with Less from the Planet, a resource efficiency approach to measuring and managing natural capital. This webinar is brought to you by Chapter Zero France, together with Chapter Zero Switzerland, in collaboration with Economics of Mutuality and Wuppertal Institute, with the collaboration of INSEAD Corporate Governance Center. My name is Sonia Tatar. I'm board member of Chapter Zero France, and it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you and to be your host today. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time, a few words on Chapter Zero that I would like to share with you. Chapter Zero is actually a unique platform that enables non-executive directors to engage effectively in a strategic debate, exchange, and conversations about the climate challenge for businesses. It facilitates network and opportunity, also brings together events, workshops tailored for non-executive directors, and provides you with toolkits and information to help boards navigate climate change. Chapter Zero is actually part of the Climate Governance Initiative launched by the World Economic Forum. Today, we count around a network of 20 plus chapters globally around the globe. Now, we are now on the second day of the Global Summit of the Climate Governance Initiative. We have heard inspiring leaders, boards, and experts calling for strategic stewardship, accountability, and action for climate urgency. Our session today has a forward-looking view, yet it introduces an immediate pragmatic approach that creates more economic value for businesses with less from the planet. You will see, and we will share with you, a resource efficiency model that allows to measure impact, to manage natural resources, but after all, to urge boards and businesses to go beyond reporting, to rather focus on input versus output. This approach dramatically changes our relationship with nature and with natural resources, as we come to a deeper understanding that natural capital is climate change first line of defense. Now, here the structure of our webinar and how we're going to share with you, the content of today's session. We will start by framing and contextualizing the model that we are presenting to you. We will share about the implication for businesses and boards, then highlight as well the business dilemmas to raise in the boardroom, how to deploy the model. We'll take and we'll share with you the coffee case. You'll hear as well from a non-executive director who is here with us, his perspective and input and feedback on the deployment before we open the Q&A session. Now, before I give the floor to our speakers, I thought I'd share with you just quick housekeeping tips here to our audience, who we thank for them to be here with us. Your microphones are muted, your videos are off, and the chat box is disabled. For any questions that you would like to address to our speakers, please use the Q&A tab. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll share with you the webinar. It will be posted on our websites. For any technical issues, please email contact@chapterzerofrance.com. Now, without further ado, let me try and introduce to you our prominent guest speakers here with us. And we have the great pleasure and we have the honor to welcome today Bruno Roche, who is founder and executive director of Economics of Mutuality Foundation, Martin Radvan, who is non-executive director of Chipita, Francesco Cordaro, who is senior expert data analytics, Economics of Mutuality Foundation, and again, our co-host Peter Brendel, who is co-chairman Chapter Zero Switzerland, and he's also CEO of Elephant Wear. Now, we really hope you will enjoy the webinar with you. Please, again, engage with us. Send us your question through the Q&A session. And here I give the floor to Bruno. Welcome, Bruno, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good night to everyone, depending on where you are joining us. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and I just would like to add a few words about myself before I move into the presentation. So my name is Bruno, as Sonia shared with you, and until a few months ago, actually, I was the chief economist of Mars Incorporated, where we started actually this concept of the economics of mutuality. And it all started with a quite unusual question that was asked to us in 2007, almost 18 months before the 2008 crisis. And the question came from a board member, actually the chairman of the board at that time. And there was discussion between the management and the board. And the question was, what should be the right level of profit? And that question was not asked in the context of should we do more profit or less profit, but the real question was what should be the right level of profit that would maximize the performance of the business in the ecosystem in which it operates. That was actually a very moving question, which took us on a long journey that actually led to the concept of economics of mutuality, which started within Mars, and we had great partnership with Oxford University, a number of business players, and eventually 6 months ago, we decided to position this management innovation in a public interest foundation that we operate from Geneva. And that's why actually my new title is no longer Chief Economist for Mars, but Founding and Executive Director for Economics of Mutuality Foundation. We could move to the next slide, please, Fiona. Actually, when we started this on this journey, we were very surprised actually that this question has never been studied in a meaningful way in business or economics. It's been in the air for a long, long time. And here I'm quoting a quote from, which is almost 3,000 years old. So it's not a new question in philosophy or in sociology, but it was a really new question in business. Next slide, please. And the reason why this question is so important today is that because the context in which business operates has fundamentally changed. First of all, we are dealing with new form of scarcities. And when you teach economics, we often say that economics is the management of scarcities. Scarcities have changed dramatically over the last 50 years. 50 years ago, financial capital was scarce and natural capital was overly abundant. Today, it's just the opposite. And actually, I'm calling you today from a place in Geneva where we have negative interest rates, which actually the artifact that financial capital is overly abundant. So the model of economics will change. It's not an ideology, it is just a natural law. We only hope actually that this change will happen through knowledge, research, experience, and not through civil wars or catastrophic events, but it will change. And then the second thing that actually happened over the last 50 years is that the size and influence of multinational corporations increased tremendously. And today we are dealing with companies that actually have more power and influence than nation states. And therefore, multinational corporations and the board actually of directors today are the real and probably the most important actors of a globalized economy. So therefore, the concept of doing business today has to take into account these two elements. A, the new form of scarcities that we have to deal with, and also the size and influence of multinational corporations. That means actually that this concept of responsible business is much more than CSR or ESG. It has to go beyond carbon and reporting. And that's why we can move to the next slide, please. And we developed over the last 15 years actually, and over the last 7-8 years with Oxford University, a new management model, which is essentially based on these 4 pillars. First of all, handle purpose as a strategy, not as a communication exercise, but as a strategy. Then, of course, understanding the ecosystem that actually is made of the stakeholders' material to that purpose. Focusing on non-financial performance metrics, because essentially business needs, of course, financial capital to operate, but it needs also natural capital, social capital, human capital to operate. So the vision we have is that if we apply the discipline of management to this new form of capital, in a context which go beyond the legal boundaries of the firm and includes all the relevant stakeholders that are material to the company's purpose. So not only the company becomes more responsible in terms of its impact, but also it becomes more profitable and more performant, even from a financial perspective and also for the shareholders. And in order to make this a reality in the business, we are proposing a new definition of profit, which helps the company align its practice and its purpose. Next slide, please. So there are three messages that we like to convey to the board members. The first one is that there is a need to shift focus from reporting, which is primarily done for risk mitigation and reputation objective, to management. So this shift actually is important. And it means actually that ESG metrics that we are dealing with these days are not only meant to report our activity, but are meant to drive the performance of the firm and its impact. That means this is the second message, that the firm, and usually start at the board level, has to redefine the concept of performance and therefore create the right incentive for the management to operate according to this new definition of performance. And the third message for the board members is that they need to empower the management to take kind of mid-long-term view to allow the change to happen. And this is what people call the value transformation. And it means actually that there is an investment to be made not only in education, but also in resources and in processes for management to implement this new approach. And the last slide, before I give the floor to Martin, is that our experience, and we've been doing this for many years now, no, just the one before, please. Is that actually, in order for this to be really effective, you need to empower a senior leader in the organization. And most likely, very often, the leader has to be the CFO or the CEO. And it means also that this transformation has to be handled like a strategic turnaround, not like a corporate exercise or something you do for corporate reputation, but really as a way to turn around strategically the firm to increase its impact and its performance. And of course, depending on the culture, it could start through a pilot or through a big bang approach. So essentially, in a nutshell, this is what we are dealing with. So I'm aware that it goes way beyond carbon footprint, but it is actually an introduction of how business can become active players and net positive contributor to society. And that includes, of course, natural capital, and includes, of course, the element of carbon and climate change. The floor is to you, Martin.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks, Bruno, for that. And again, hi, everybody around the world. My name is Martin Radvan. Just to introduce myself, I retired from Mars a couple of years ago after some 33 years. And I now work as a non-exec, as a mentor, and as a consultant. So as Bruno mentioned, I happened to be with him at that very first meeting when the question was asked regarding the right level of profit. In 2007, and that's a very tough question to answer. But since then, we started working on it, and I've stayed very close to the working and the development of EOM since then. And during my time at Mars, I was lucky enough and had the opportunity to run a number of different business segments across the portfolio. And this enabled my teams, with Bruno's help, to work on real business problems. To experiment, to test, and to build the EOM methodologies and the learnings across those businesses. Very importantly, all of the pilots were focused on very specific business problems that we faced. They were run by the business, for the business, with the support of the EOM team, and also importantly with the help of the Oxford Business School to ensure we had good rigor, academic rigor. We weren't eating our own dog food, as we like to say. And just some examples of those pilots that we ran in the Wrigley segment, chewing gum, which I ran for a number of years. A couple of examples I can talk about. One of the business problems we faced was how do we access and service the mass populations in the cities in Africa? And the solution, and we had lots of expertise on training, was to us to find, identify, and train mobile salespeople who lived in the townships, who could therefore access these areas. Easier said than done. And believe me, there were many wrong steps in our attempts to do it. But via partnering with various NGOs, we trained a number of sellers in Nairobi with a very subsequent impact on both people and the social capital. And importantly, a very positive response on the financial capital as well. Another problem we faced in the same business was how do we further develop, and more crucially, how do we sustain a mint crop, oil from India? Again, the solution included partnering with NGOs, and we provided remote learning for the communities, specifically the women and children in those communities, and helped establish best practice for oil production. And we had resultant impacts in social, people, and natural capital. And of course, we secured a sustainable source. But let's talk about coffee, Mars Drinks. And when I was running Mars Drinks, we wanted to move from a machine to a drinks business. And we had probably the huge luxury of being small. We were small in coffee, and we had a very simple question: where should we buy our coffee from? Where should we source it? And for what reason? A very simple question again, but very hard to answer, because we wanted to choose a source where we could have the best impact on the environment, the natural capital, but also where we could improve the livelihood of farmers, both the people capital and the social capital. So we embarked on those pilots, and I'm going to hand over now to Francesco, and he'll talk to you in detail about the natural capital part of this coffee pilot and the methodology employed. And then later on, I'll talk about the business impact. Over to you, Francesco.
Thank you, Martin. I will show my screen. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Francesco Cordaro, and I lead the data science and data analytics practice within the Economics of Mutuality Foundation. So thanks to Bruno and Martin to setting up the context. What we see now is how to put these ideas into practice in the case of natural capital. And we'll do it by illustrating a business case that we call the journey of a cup of coffee. It's a journey that starts in Colombia, in a farm in Colombia, and ends as a cup of coffee in the UK. Our journey is made of several steps, from agriculture in Colombia, processing, packaging, use, and the end of life in the UK. Each phase is occurring in different locations and has different impact on the environment, as we see. The agricultural phase is in Colombia, where we have the farm producing the coffee beans. The coffee beans are shipped always in Colombia to the washing and depulping facility. They are further on shipped to UK, to the coffee roasting facility, deployed at manufacturing sites where the coffee is grinded, blended, and where the packaging is assembled. We're talking about a single serve type of products. It is then distributed to the final user, and then at the end of the story is the disposal of what remains of the packaging of the coffee, which is made of aluminum foil and the coffee and the filter, and then eventually also the coffee mug if they are not recycled or reused. How are we going to assess the impact on natural capital for this journey? We will take a resource efficiency approach, our resource efficiency lenses. What are the implications for the business? The implication is that by applying these tools, we are able to create more with less, which means deliver a greater value by using less input from the planet. It's not really new. Many businesses are already looking at this approach. I give you some reference here, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or within the governmental institutions, the European Union Green Flagship Initiative. So I refer you to that. As within the Economics of Mutuality, we've been working on this approach since 2008 as a collaboration with the Wuppertal Institute for Climate Energy in Germany. When we talk about resource efficiency and thinking about reducing the input from the planet, one may be led to think about this is going to imply reducing the economic growth, reducing consumption, reducing the quality of life. This is not necessarily true. And that's where the factor 4 concept or factor 10 concept comes to the game. This is not true. We could use less from the planet and still enjoy positive growth and increased quality of life. The key point is to use existing technologies or develop new technologies and apply them to our production processes. What are the implications? The implication is that we will focus to improve and increase the resource productivity, improve the overall efficiency of the value chain of the production by using appropriate technological innovations, and for a business to maximize what we can get out from the input from the planet. Applying this vision requires understanding how to manage natural capital, natural resources. And managing requires to have a proper way to measure natural capital. We can speak broadly of two approaches in measuring natural capital. One is input focused on natural resources, and one is focused on outputs. Probably the second is more familiar to the audience. Measuring the outputs is focusing on measuring the amount of emissions in CO2, greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, or wastage. It's a very good approach. All the businesses are doing it, and it's designed to set targets year on year to understand where do we put ourselves, place ourselves compared to the targets for climate change. It's good for reporting results and benchmarking our company towards other companies in the same sector. But it is company-centric. We only look at what we are reporting, what the emissions are we are producing. On the other hand, the input approach is focusing on measuring the overall amount of natural resources that we require to end up with our final good or service. So by its very design, it focuses on the whole value chain. It takes into account all the natural resources for the whole life cycle of the products. This is focusing you to have a systemic view, putting the product or the service at the center of this ecosystem, and then understand what all other stakeholders are doing to contribute producing these goods, and what are the resources implications for that. As such, it is a very good system for management of natural resources. Whatever you can measure, you always know how to address and how to reduce the inputs. Why we decide to focus on the input approach rather than outputs? Well, first of all the businesses are already doing the outputs, but it is good for reporting and not for taking business decisions. It's not a management tool. Input metric instead, by focusing on the impact of the overall value chain, is enabling us to have a clear view where they have the hotspots, environmental hotspots that we can address. And then it is easier and more pragmatic to measure. We always know what is the input we require. A company always knows how much natural resource they need to buy and how much energy they're going to consume. So it's more practical to measure input other than outputs. And the way it's settled can be embedded into a new system of accounting. A system that takes into account all the externalities that we produce on the environment and enable us to internalize. Once we know how to measure and we know the amount of natural resources, we are able to evaluate the real cost of the externalities. So we are able to internalize them. And last but not least, being product-centric versus company-centric enable us to have a broader view and maintain an ecosystemic point of view of the natural capital measurement and management. So talking about input metrics, what are they and how this is applying for a coffee case? We can reduce the input metrics to 5 big general natural capital assets. One is the air, which is not to be confused with the emissions. It is the air we consume and is implied in all the production processes. So all the oxygen absorbed in all the combustion or oxidation processes, all the water we need to get our final products, the renewable materials that are required, all the living organisms that are implied, plants, for example, but also livestock. The non-renewable materials, all the minerals, metals, everything we take usually out of the ground, but we are not able to replace it. So it's not renewable. And then last but not least, the topsoil, the amount of soil that we lose every time we drink a cup of coffee. What is the implication for a cup of coffee? We can estimate the cost in terms of natural resources of a single cup of coffee. We know that a single cup of coffee is responsible for absorbing 69 grams of air, or using 3.4 liters for just a cup of coffee, 41 grams of renewable materials, and 146 for all the non-living, non-renewable materials that we have in place. And then topsoil erosion is important because it gives a good approximation of the impact we have on biodiversity on the ecosystem. And we are losing 12 grams of soil every time we drink a cup of coffee. And we lose 3.4 liters of water every time we drink a cup of coffee. So something that's leads us to think. Once we know that, what do? We want to reduce the input of the planet because this is the resource efficiency approach we are taking. But we have a long production value chain. Where do we act? So we do an hotspot analysis on the various phases of the value chain. We try to prioritize what are the phases that have major impact on the environment. In our case, we have the agriculture, then the usage, and then the packaging. And then, thanks to the accounting of input of natural resources, we know how much of each of the 5 input metrics are implied in each phase. So for example, in agriculture, if we want to act on agriculture, because it's the phase which has the highest impact on the environment, we know that the input metrics we need to reduce are the topsoil erosion of the renewable materials. Or for example, for usage, we know that if we want to address the impact of the usage on all the planets, we have to reduce the amount of water implication of the non-renewable materials. Mostly is about packaging, and packaging as well. If we want to reduce the impact of packaging, we have to work on how we can make less usage of non-renewable materials, or recycle them or reuse them. So this approach enables us to do 2 things. Very pragmatically, we have to look at the whole value chain, and we decide we can prioritize where to intervene. Secondly, for each phase that we are trying to address, we will know how much input it is required is affecting that phase, and we know what we can do to reduce it. In this way, we are going to reduce the impact on the planet, reducing the inputs, and maximize the return on the natural resources that we are using. I will give the floor back to Bruno just to conclude the remarks on this approach. Here we are, Bruno. You're on mute.
Thank you, Francesco. And essentially, the key takeaway we like to communicate in this section is actually it was interesting because this morning I had a long conversation with the head of a large private equity firm, and it was a lady actually who said actually today I'm just reading what she said is that the risk is the basis for why ESG exists, and but essentially the risk framework as it is designed today is not working because the ESG work is primarily linked on this concept of output, and therefore it's very difficult to bring it back into a context of how you manage resources. And essentially what we've done here is that we've taken just a completely different approach. We looked at this question of natural capital and air and pollution, and and of course with the impact on climate change and CO2 from an input perspective. So I think from maybe the first key takeaway is that if we just focus on natural capital is much more than climate. And actually some companies are really exposed to CO2 emissions and some are less exposed. And as you can see, actually, we are covering here 5 types of natural capital assets. The first one is air, which is actually directly connected to CO2 emissions, but water, soil erosion, organic and inorganic material actually constitutes about 95% of what any company needs to operate. So this actually accounting system of natural capital is much more comprehensive than just climate change or CO2 emissions, but also help company understand how they can manage these scarce resources, because natural capital is scarce, so it needs to be managed very carefully. So in order to manage this carefully and to maximize actually the impact on the planet, our argument is that it requires an input approach and not an output approach. It means actually that it's part of the fabric and on the business model of the company. And what we found during our research is that this concept of resource efficiency and factor 4 approach can really equip business to create more economic value with less input from the planet. And it is very pragmatic. It doesn't take, you need to have actually a PhD in ecology to understand this. Just understanding that, yes, there are some natural capital that actually are important for your business. And depending on the scarcity and the impact of your company on this capital, you may actually pay more attention to them. And the fourth takeaway is that we are here proposing to leverage the language and the practice of accounting in order to bring this natural capital accounting system into the fabric, into the making of the management account. And this actually helps the company understand the type of natural resources that is extracted by business activity. And this works at business unit level. So it's fairly low level. It's more like a bottom-up approach that can be aggregated, of course, but it starts from where we do business. So most of the time at the level of a business unit. And also it helps companies understand their true level of profit, because essentially companies create both negative and positive externalities. And the approach we are proposing here is to factor in these positive and negative externalities in such a way that we can come up with a new management account, which helps companies align their true level of profit with their practice and their purpose. So these are actually the key takeaways we wanted you to take from this section. And we hope the example we gave you on this journey of a cup of coffee will inspire you, because it's actually a methodology that can apply across multiple businesses, multiple brands. It's just an example here that shows it could be applied on multiple occasions. But now I'd like just to give the floor to Martin again, so that he can share a little bit his perspective on how to deploy such an approach and the road to success.
Thanks, guys. And thanks, Francesco. I mean, he shared with you some real examples and data of finding out what the impact of natural capital is. And of course, you can perform exactly the same for social people and financial capital. We measure broadly financial capital, but you can do it in detail to see where it's shared. But so what? Well, from those results, you start to focus on the pain points in your business. And fundamentally, you can start to find your own business skills many of you have within their businesses, and your partner's skills and expertise to start addressing some of the pain points for the mutual benefit of everybody involved in that ecosystem. Now, they were all pilots, and each of those pilots delivered great business benefits to the specific business units, which was, of course, the primary goal. But for me as a business leader running the segments, or for you as non-execs or board members or operational business leaders, the important point I'd like to stress is the importance, and what surprised me the most is the impact it started having on our why. Our associates, as we call our employees, the engagement was huge. People understood what we were doing very simply and started to say they can make a difference as well. The engagement of our suppliers, of our customers also increased. People were interested, people engaged, and people wanted to help, wanted to do business. That mutual benefit was what would simply happen is we're moving from just financial goals, which we wanted to double the size of the business, and we made no bones about that. And our purpose was still to make money. This is not a charity or a foundation, to much broader targets. So that primary interest for all of you is can you move to tangible measures on your operational business that can identify what are the benefits you have for driving your business forward, to bring people into your business, to bring your employees, your customers, your suppliers, society as a whole, into not just the financial goals of your business, the shareholder returns, but the wider benefits that your business can have and the wider engagement. Why choose your business? And of course, these were just pilots, and there have been many, many more since, and there will be many more. But I think the fundamental opportunity to start using the EOM methodology to start building a purpose for your business and taking a purpose for a strategy. And just imagine, as a board member, your purpose is your strategy. Your performance can be measured and rewarded. The management can be rewarded, not just for the financial impact, but for the broader impacts that they're having. And finally, you can empower the whole ecosystem to get on and tackle those problems and to build your business. So that's all I have to say. And now I'm going to hand over to Peter. I'm sure there's some questions from people.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. It's amazing. We have close to a half an hour left for questions, and that was the idea, to keep it really interactive. And I see plenty of questions in the Q&A section, and let's start with the first one, which is actually to you, Martin. You have talked about the chewing gum business. What has changed? Because one of our audience member thinks or challenges you, it's simply about profit, isn't it?
Great question. And first of all, let's be very, very clear. Financial performance is very, very important. This is in no way saying that I'm going to chase another metric. So financial performance is at the bedrock. If not, there's nothing wrong with it, but you build a charity or a foundation. This is about a business and performance of a business. We talk specifically about chewing gum, then I think you talk in the context of the purpose is more in the context of the general confectionery and bringing happiness, bringing joy to people across the world. There are some functional benefits. This particular pilot, one in Africa, for example, in Kenya, that was for the Kenyan unit. The engagement that delivered for the Kenyan unit, what they saw happening is, yes, they sold more, but they saw more than 1,000 people becoming involved in their business, making money, making a living from nothing before, and building a social capital in the slums of Nairobi, which was incredibly inspiring for that team in Kenya, for that whole team in Kenya and the factory there, helping to do it, but also shared widely. On the mint example, it was to help us have a sustainable crop for the future, because we know they need the crop not just for a year's time, but for 10 years' time. Yeah, but to help and then for people to actually start to engage people back in Chicago to see where their product comes from, what impact they have on the world. That was a huge engagement part of the business. And there were other pilots. There were Pinol. Chewing gum has great benefits on dental care. Of course, I'm biased. I could talk about chewing gum for a long, long time, but just to say that the impacts. But fundamentally, the question, it was not at the expense of profit. Financial profit was a very, very important part of it. It was building a business, which is, as board members, you're all responsible for doing. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. And if we stay on the product level, question to Francesco. Reducing the footprint of a cup of coffee is fine, but wouldn't it be the best solution to stop drinking coffee?
You're on mute, Francesco.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, this was not the idea to reduce consumption just for that. The idea is to drink coffee in a different way and select those products which have a clear and transparent communication about how much resource they are using, the origin of these resources, but not only for natural resources, also for impact on the social and human capital. So not stop drinking coffee, drink a better coffee.
Okay. Good. Then more on the methodological side, and also still with you, Francesco. You talked about natural capital, and there are other dimensions like biodiversity or land use.
Yeah, biodiversity and land use are metrics that were included in our study. We didn't see them explicitly. That were used in the what we call the hotspot analysis, try to understand the specific impact on each phase. I mentioned that the topsoil erosion was one proxy of how the land is used and the impact on biodiversity, because the loss of soil depends on the type of agricultural practices put in place, the use of fertilizer or pesticides, which have an impact on biodiversity. So they are included and they were taken into account in the hotspot analysis.
Okay. Bruno, question to you was asked. It seems that there are some parallels with the principles of circular economy. Can you comment on this?
Yes, I mean, the parallel is very much about the intent, which is about doing everything possible to reduce the input from the planet and to maximize the output for the economy. So to that extent, the circular economy is a strategy to exactly address the strategy of doing more with less. So that's an element of comparison. But the second point we need to say immediately is that this concept of resource efficiency is an analysis. It's a tool to help management where to intervene and where it could have the most impact on essentially the economic performance and the use of natural capital for the least amount of resources. So essentially, we apply here the discipline of management that we apply usually to financial capital, but in this case, we apply it to natural capital. And so this is where it's powerful, because it's really using the practice and language of management and accounting, not applied to financial performance, but to natural capital performance. So to that extent, the circular economy, or the innovation coming from circular economy, is on many levels solutions to address a pain point identified through the EOM approach.
Okay. Next question, probably to both you, Bruno, and Martin. Someone has observed that the CFOs currently are already skeptical about integrating the carbon dimension into accounting or investment cases. How about integrating even more dimensions?
Bruno, I'll follow up.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the difficulty of integrating the carbon is actually to give a price. So to give a dollar value to carbon. And actually, this is not what we're doing here. When we talked about this concept of mutual P&L, we are talking, first of all, of a single bottom line, not a triple bottom line. And we are talking about management accounts. So it's the accounting for cost. I know it's a bit technical, but essentially our hypothesis and our argument is that we don't want to give a dollar value to a non-financial capital. We want to remunerate financial capital with financial capital. We want to remunerate natural capital with natural capital. So for instance, if you pollute air or if you pollute water, and it's part of your ecosystem that you want to fix, then you replace dirty air or polluted air with clean air. You replace polluted water with clean water. And of course, the process of depolluting has a cost. But the cost could vary depending you're in Germany or in Guatemala. And it is that cost actually that needs to be factored in the P&L. So we are taking a radically different approach of not giving a dollar value to something which is not a monetary asset. And it reminds me the famous quote of, I think it was Oscar Wilde, who said, you know what is the definition of a cynic? It's a guy who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. So we want to stay away from this form of cynicism when you apply this to carbon accounting.
Yeah, and I just add to that. You know, I work with many CFOs on this, on these pilots, and the first thing I'd say is that if a CFO is anything, their disciples are you get what you measure. And this gives you very clear ways of measuring something very specific, sometimes financially, but in other ways. You can put a measure against it, you can see an improvement, and up or down. And you show me an accountant who doesn't love that. Yeah? That's what they do for a living. So the ability then to start connecting the goals of the company with the input measures that we're going to do for the whole ecosystem. Say, bringing CFOs onto that bus is of course a challenge. It's a change, but most of them embraced it as a way forward, where they actually could turn around and hold people accountable. That's their job for what they measure.
Okay. If we still stay in the executive suite, talking about CEOs, someone was intrigued by your question, what is the right level of profit? And has made reference on the case recently of Danone, who apparently the CEO or the board was not happy with the financial performance, or at Unilever. Can you tell more about this trade-off? Bruno, maybe?
I'll start. I'll let Bruno come into detail. So I think the thing to take into account is the timescales. Yeah. And again, to stress, this is not about diluting financial capital. This is making capital. This is mutual. And the principle that comes from that mutuality is that a shared benefit will endure. So yes, we can get a financial benefit for 3 months, 6 months by screwing the price down of a supplier. Of course you can. Anybody can do that. If you're big enough and powerful enough, you can do it. However, as soon as that supplier gets a chance to leave you, guess what he or she will do? Now, if you want to be in business, so the big purpose is, this is not about being in business for 5 minutes or 5 months. This is about the purpose of your business. And most businesses want to endure. And therefore, setting out and saying that this benefit for everybody involved in our ecosystem, all will benefit and all will endure. And our business will endure. That's where you start from, not from, can I make a quick buck in the next 5 minutes?
Okay, Bruno?
Yeah, well, I remember when we started this journey in 2007, actually, so almost 14 years ago. I remember it was actually one of the lead professor at Harvard Business School who asked me actually to pay a visit to an author in the US, a man called Wendell Berry. And he's known for being someone who looks after the natural capitals. And he was a bit intrigued to say, well, what are these people are coming? People from Mars, from big multinational corporations. Eventually, we had a good conversation. And essentially, he said exactly what Martin said. He said, if your objective is to make money for 1 year, you don't ask the same question as if you are in the business for the next 100 years. I think the time dimension and the value creation process is important. Now, going back to your question, the whole purpose actually of Economics of Mutuality is to show very clearly that, the profit maximization model works. I mean, the Chicago School of Thought is working. I mean, maximizing profits for the shareholder is a system that works. But it's not because it works that it is not suboptimum. And what we're demonstrating, and it's not a theory, it's a series of case studies, that if a business goes beyond management of financial capital and embraces different forms of capital, and goes beyond just mono-stakeholder capitalism and embraces multiple stakeholders, it is essentially good for your business. And our argument is that it's a bit like what happened in the 70s and 80s when some companies at least decided to invest massively into something called brands. At that time, most companies, especially in the consumer goods sector, were in business if they knew how to make stuff and sell stuff. But branding was something a little bit weird. And I remember a discussion I had with many leaders at that time when I did my research. They were even scared because we need to work with people like media agencies, Hollywood makers, filmmakers, not really business people. But eventually there has been a statement, like a strategic decision to say, well, we are going to invest in something called brand because we believe that the brands can drive value creation, but can also become the repository of value creation. And eventually the companies that did not do that at the time, they prospered for a while because they were actually able to make more money and probably making also a squeeze more environment, but eventually they withered, decayed, and died. And our argument is that we are at a similar point in time. Companies that do not invest in the ecosystem in which they operate, investing in social, human, natural capital, in such a way that also they expect a return from that investment, which is exactly what when we are investing in brands. Not only these companies are going to keep their license to operate, this is the risk management dimension, but they were also going to outperform. And I don't know Danone enough, but our vision is that actually what we're proposing is not at the expense of financial performance. It is the opposite. It's a more complete and more resilient way of delivering value creation.
Thank you. We have some very practical-minded people in the audience, board members who want to start, who are convinced. How can they start? And do you have any experience beyond Mars, how it works? What were the challenges? Maybe Martin?
Yeah, obviously my experience is Mars. Bruno through the foundation and talks about the other companies, helped and talked to other companies about it. But what I would start with as any board member is ask the questions. What are you doing? Do you know? You take that coffee example of your product. Do you know where the money is shared from a bean of coffee to the disposed cup? Does anybody know? Because transparency starts to build the interest. So and then you say, well, I don't know. So you start to measure it. There are methodologies and ways of doing it. Yeah. Of course, what is the impact on the impact and the input? So what are we doing how much do we spend on cleaning up our water? That's because we're having an impact. And so I think at the start, the point of the board is to ask the questions, really, what are we doing? And that starts to say, if our purpose a marketing strategy, or is our purpose a business strategy? Is it a nice marketing slogan? Or is it really about what we do? And if it is about what we do, very simply, back to your CFO question, how do we measure it? How do I know you're doing it? Apart from you just say, yeah, this is great. Yeah. How do I know you're doing it? How do I measure it? Those are the practical start. And so from a board, that's your job, is to ask questions. So start asking.
Bruno, maybe something to add?
I really believe actually the role of board is exactly that, is to ask the right questions and keep asking the right question. And I think as we are moving forward, this transformation that actually is not only necessary for business to continue to operate, but also an opportunity, and maybe actually a once in a lifetime opportunity, should sit in the hands of people who think about strategy of the business. And it's combination between board members and leadership teams. And in a sense, the board, as I said in my earlier note, the board, in a sense, could ask management to shift from reporting to management. Stop reporting just like ticking the box, but essentially asking questions about how does it create value? How does doing this kind of intervention in an ecosystem or natural capital, how does it create value? I really believe actually that business is in the business of delivering performance. Okay. The second type of question or challenge that board can ask is to redefine the measurement of performance and ensure actually that the new definition of performance, which is usually very specific to a given sector or a given company, is linked to the incentive, because essentially you can only expect when you inspect. And management is about measurement. So if you don't equip your business with a set of metrics that are actually aligned with your practice and your purpose, you're actually creating a lack of alignment. And these days, business is very complex. So anything actually can help alignment will help actually performance. But essentially also, I think the most important one is to ensure the board is aligned to equip management to cross this valley of transformation. And one of the issues we have today, and it's also one of the work we do at the foundation, is that in a sense, companies today have more power and more influence than nation states, but yet they are ill-equipped to handle the complexity and the challenges that their position and influence and size confer on them. And it's a question actually for the management school. Today, this concept of responsible business or sustainability is still an elective. It's not part of the core teaching of management schools. So if we want to achieve a kind of a systemic change, which is actually why the foundation exists, it had to sit on three pillars: educating, and start with education of executive directors and non-executive directors. It also starts with the addressing these issues like a turnaround. We are used to this concept of turnaround to make more profits. I think we are moving into a paradigm where we're making turnarounds to have more impact and performance. And the last bit, of course, is to bring the investors on board, which usually the board member represent.
And that was exactly also one question, and let's take this as the last question for today. Alignment, management and board is fine, but alignment, board and shareholders is also important. What is the reaction of shareholders to Economics of Mutuality?
So, well, first of all, if you take shareholder, I mean, in Mars, we were lucky, it's private, so the shareholders were the owners. Obviously, their impact was they're inspired enough to create a foundation which is outside of Mars, nothing to do with Mars now, to spread the wisdom and the work to other companies. I think the other side of it is shareholders will generally react well to being able to measure stuff. But if you ever want I'm an old salesman, so if you want to go through the other side of it, you want to get into the fear close. Do you want your company on the front page because something you're doing is having a huge impact that you didn't know? Maybe you didn't know, but not knowing today is not enough. So if you haven't asked those questions and you're on the front page because your company is exploiting something, is doing bad to the environment or doing bad to people or the social capital, every shareholder understands the impact that can have on your business tomorrow. So there's also the fear closer. How can you improve that going forward?
Good. Looking at the watch, and we Swiss are known for keeping time. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up here. We would have tons of more questions, and maybe that calls for a second edition here. But we would like to respect also your schedules. And so just basically 3 elements from my side. First of all, a big thank you to you, the panelists and the team behind that made it possible. A big thank you to you, the audience, to take the time and engage in so high numbers. We were over 3 persons today attending. Secondly, really, it was a great discussion and really inspiring for us. Doing more with less, isn't this a dream we have in the boardrooms and the executive suites? And what you, Bruno, Martin, and Francesco have shown us is that it's much more than a dream. It's a necessity and a possibility. By looking beyond reporting, by looking beyond carbon and redefining performance. And what we have learned is also it starts with a good cup of coffee. So in that spirit, wish you a really nice rest of the day. Let us stay in touch and continue the dialogue. Become a member of Chapter 0, France, Switzerland, or any other country for that matter. There you will find other events that come up, plenty of resources that allow us to engage even more effectively in the debate about climate challenge for our businesses. And secondly, as Sonia has mentioned in the beginning, it's the Global Summit this week. There are even today and right now following us other online events, but you can also rewatch already the ones of the past week. Really high caliber with Al Gore, Mark Tucker and the likes. And go check it out. And really with that, a big thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.